same sentiment. I do appreciate you taking the time to come down here today. And I've been asked to talk about Senate Bill 546, is a bill that I pre-filed this year. It's actually a bill I filed very near the end of filing the period last year. So it's sometimes been branded nationally as the Healthcare Freedom Act 2.0. So I know you're all very politically involved, and you remember that in 2010 we all voted for the Healthcare Freedom Act. And in that vote, 71% of Missourians voted for the Healthcare Freedom Act. And many on the left thought that that was a symbolic measure that we took, and it really didn't mean anything. But what it actually did is it created a law that's in the statute. So it's interesting people are so quick to ignore laws on the books. And what that law essentially said is it said, look, Missourians can't be penalized for not purchasing health care, nor can they be penalized for not offering health care. So we kind of know what that means in the context of the Affordable Care Act. What this bill does, and the irony of this bill, is it actually asks our insurance companies here in Missouri to follow the Affordable Care Act by law. Okay, so the moving through the courts right now is, I know the Attorney General from Oklahoma is pushing through the courts that you probably know that in the Affordable Care Act, this idea of where subsidies are allowed to flow through, the Affordable Care Act is very clear. It says that federal subsidies are only supposed to flow through those state-run exchanges, the states that create the exchanges. So as you also know, Prop E, last voting cycle, 62% of us voted not to have Missouri create their exchange. So in terms of listening to the people are speaking very loudly on this issue. So what that law says, what Obamacare says today, is that if you're a state that only has federal exchanges, then subsidies don't go to that state. Now, why is this important? Why is it important that we understand when subsidies are flowing or not flowing? Well, it's when a subsidy, again, this is to the law as written, when the subsidy is received by the insurance company, that triggers the employer penalty. So in Obamacare, there's this employer penalty that has been postponed for a year, but will become very real next year. And when an employer, we know it's 50 or more employees and things like that, but if you're a bigger company that right now the law says you have to offer health care, and if you don't, you're penalized. The trigger mechanism for being penalized is that on the exchange there have to be policies that have a subsidy attached to them. Okay, so what does all this mean? My bill says, look, insurance companies, and again, the Affordable Care Act is very explicit about that states will continue to regulate insurance companies. So what this bill says is, okay, we want you guys, insurance companies, to follow statutes, to follow the Healthcare Freedom Act, which says, hey, we don't want penalties to be imposed on employers. So therefore, we're also asking you to follow the Obamacare law as written and not take subsidies. If you take subsidies, then you'll lose your license. You won't be able to sell insurance in Missouri. And if you follow the law as written, don't take subsidies, thereby we'll be protecting our employers, because our employers are only penalized when in fact subsidies flow through. So the potential for this legislation is strongest in both Missouri and Ohio. Because it's in Missouri where we changed statutes with Prop C. In Ohio, they actually went so far as to change their constitution. So if we were to somehow pass my bill, and as you might imagine, there's tremendous opposition to what I'm trying to propose, but what I have proposed. Clearly it's something that the Democrats will not support. The governor will certainly veto. And then to the extent that we could override a veto, as you might imagine, we all have come to recognize that there are a lot of special interests that very much like Obamacare. And those same special interests that have influence in DC have similar interests here in our capital. But nonetheless, if we were to somehow pass this into law, I'm not saying it would be impossible, but it would stand up very well in court. Because in fact, what we would be doing is we would be asking our insurance companies to follow the federal law, and in following the federal law, we would be protecting our employers, which is what 71% of Missourians voted for. And when that would come to be, then that means that subsidies would stop flowing to the state. So that's my bill. It's Senate Bill 546. So I do appreciate you taking time to be here today to maybe come to understand. Yes, sir.
I just have one quick question. I'm not gifted on this subject. I appreciate you presenting it to us, but looking at it from the other side, just for a second, is it possible that maybe some of those insurance companies would not offer insurance within the state of Missouri because of this kind of dichotomy?
Well,
They
and
feel like they're being like alligators, getting
Right.
their feet and they just move on.
Right. No, I mean, clearly, none of us know what would happen if this would come to be, if my bill would become law. Just like none of us can really say what's going to happen next with Obamacare. I mean, the bill is changed every 2 or 3 weeks. The law is changed. Things are followed. Things are not followed. Penalties are exacted. Penalties are pushed back. I was on some radio show and they would say, well, what would happen if this law became, what would happen? Where would the subsidies come from? Well, again, I know you all are very knowledgeable. Right now, what we have going through the courts is that the IRS, who is the collection agency for Obamacare, they have chose to ignore the law, and they will allow subsidies to go through federal exchanges. So in Missouri, we have a federal exchange, and subsidies are, I guess subsidies are flowing. Obviously, no money's moved yet through the system. So really, I'm not to avoid the answer to your question. I don't know what would happen. I don't think anyone knows. If anyone in this room knows what's going to happen to Obamacare 2 weeks from now, then they don't know. It's a lie. So the idea behind this, though, is so many Missourians for sure, and then so many other citizens in this country that feel like this healthcare system was foisted upon them, have said to us at the state level, well, what can we do? How can we fight back at the state level? And the answer you most often hear is, well, this is a federal issue. This is a federal law, and it's difficult for us to fight back. And what this is a very interesting approach to take to try to push back. But this bill, if it were to become law, would be the mechanism by which the states could actually push back. And I think if there's just 1 or 2 states that do it won't have the effect. But if we got 20 or 25 states to do it, I think it would have a material effect. Yes, ma'am.
You said that the law changes, but does the law actually change?
The administration law. The administration law. Yeah.
When we report on that, I think we need to stop saying the law is changing. We need to point out that our president has taken unconstitutional law.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's well said. So yeah, no, the administration of law has changed.
If we would enforce the law.
And gratefully, we've seen some of the U.S. senators have now filed suit, which is good. And then again, I think that the lawsuit, there's obviously a lot of lawsuits that are moving to the court, Hobby Lobby, things like that. But the lawsuit that's being led by the Oklahoma Attorney General is specific to where these subsidies can and can't flow, and that's consistent with what is in this proposal. Yes, sir.
There's been some discussion about state nullification of Obamacare under the 9th and 10th Amendments of the Bill of Rights, because there's no mention of health care in the Constitution. Therefore, health care would qualify as a reserved right, which is reserved for the states and the people, and would thereby be prohibited to the federal government.
And people that support people that support the idea of nullification or 9th, 10th Amendment issues, they have looked at the bill that I filed, and through their eyes, through their prism, how they see things, they think that it fits in that space as well.
Yes.
And it may or may not be the case. That what I know is that it would follow Missouri statutes. Okay, so again, the Affordable Care Act says, look, states have the right to authorize insurance companies in their state. Missouri has a law that says you can't penalize employers or employees. The Obamacare says subsidies can only go to state-run exchanges. Missouri has Prop B that says no state-run exchanges. So what my bill says is, okay, Missouri, let's follow the insurance companies, let's follow the federal law, let's follow the state law, and let's protect our employers who otherwise would be penalized. Ron?
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
I agree with you. Nullification is one form of interposition, and nullification can take a lot of different forms. And so when you as a representative of Missourians stand in the gap between unconstitutional federal acts and the rights of Missourians, you are interposing, and you are in effect nullifying federal law in some fashion. So I think it does fall under that general category.
In the context of the probability of being able to go forward and actually get a bill like this to a vote or to pass and become law, it's easy to get bogged down in, bigger constitutional discussions, when in fact this may very well fall in that debate. But the simplicity of the bill is that, okay, Missouri's insurance companies will actually follow the law, the federal law. Missouri's insurance companies will follow the state law. And the net result of that would be is that subsidies wouldn't flow through a federal exchange, and therefore our employees wouldn't be penalized because the subsidies trigger the penalty. Yes, ma'am?
What does something like that have to do with one individual person who does not have insurance? Will they still be penalized the $95 or whatever it is if they don't get insurance?
Now, in terms of this is more, this is the mechanism by which we can actually protect employers. So, again, as you know, I know because all of you are so very informed on this issue, so that the idea of the individual penalty is an interesting one, as you know. So you may not be aware that the collection mechanism for the individual penalty it's through your tax return.
Yes.
And to the extent that I know most people like to withhold a little bit, so then they have money returned to them as opposed to owing the federal government money. But if in fact you did your tax return in a given year and you underwithheld, there's no mechanism to have you be penalized. Okay, so the collection mechanism, and again, you passed a 2,700-page bill, which only the special interest knew what was in it. Inside that bill, according to that law, how you collect the individual penalty is you essentially, when somebody's overwithheld, then you hold back the penalty. So one of the things we can all do as individuals is underwithhold if we find ourselves likely to be penalized, and there's no mechanism to collect the individual penalty. Yes, ma'am?
I actually read something that said that the IRS would penalize you and you would have to pay that up front before they would consider sending your return back. So they won't actually take it out of your return. They're going to make you pay it first, and then they will send you your return.
And that may very well be. And like we said, this is the execution of this law has a life of its own. But again, it's one of those situations where the law as it's written didn't allow for that, and so in the rulemaking process, they're trying to change things around, just like they did with the subsidies. Yes, ma'am?
If you haven't read the book, The Obamacare Disaster, make sure you get a copy of that and read the chapter on taxation and debt. And if you're not inspired to get behind this bill now, you will be. So it's the Obamacare Disaster. It's put out by Heartland Press. And if you are a Tea Party organizer, they, at the St. Louis CPAC, said they would send you copies free to distribute. I urge you to read that. It will put some fire under your feet to get up here and support these bills.
Yeah, there really hasn't been another way across the country for states to put the individual legislatures to push back. We push back with respect to exchanges, not having a state-run exchange. We push back on the licensing of navigators and the non-expansion of Medicaid. Things like that have been ways by which state legislatures can push back. And to the best of my knowledge, this is the first kind of legislative action that a legislature could take that would, again, it would, in this instance, it would protect the employers from the employer penalty. Yes, ma'am?
I think you said Oklahoma has a similar bill.
No, actually, Oklahoma, it's the lawsuit. Okay, so that Attorney General took the lead on pursuing this idea that the subsidies, by law, are only to flow through the state-run exchanges. See, the federal government was doing everything in its power. They wanted nothing with federal exchanges. They didn't want to run the federal exchanges. They wanted to coerce all the states into creating their own exchanges, and primarily because it's an impossible task technologically. It's very expensive, and what the bill did, Obamacare did, is it actually gave grant money to the states to try to go do it. But we all know that the federal rollout was horrible compared to the states. But if you now circle back, the state-run exchanges are really in deep trouble. A lot of them, states like Oregon, have not functioned at all. And all those states that agreed to take that upfront money and then to actually build their own exchanges, they completely ignored the annual ongoing operating cost of the exchange, which will be, very large. So we were smart here not to pursue a state-run exchange. But no, so it's the Oklahoma Attorney General that said, well, look at the federal law. Look how it's written. Again, the lawmakers wanted to do everything they could to get the states to take on the burden of the state-run exchange, including having the subsidies only flow through a state-run exchange.
So is there any other state that has a bill like yours?
Ohio. Because again, what gives it a lot more heft is that you all voted for the Healthcare Freedom Act. So our statutes say, by that created statute, that law says you can't penalize people for not offering or buying health care, and Ohio actually changed their constitution. So what this bill, this is kind of like the enabling legislation to allow for the protection that is provided by the Healthcare Freedom Act.
So you said it would make a big impact if we could get 20 or 21 states. So are you trying to do that in some way to help them?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge we have, unfortunately, I mean, I'll rewind. I introduced this bill last March. We finally got to this idea. So as all of you probably thought, and I think even the people that wrote Obamacare thought, that we thought that the Supreme Court would throw out Obamacare. We all did, right? And so a lot of the good ideas that were out. I mean, the ideas that we had was, really to, not do exchange and things like that. And then this is what, June of 12, right? So we all think that's how it's going to come. So when somehow Roberts decided that he figured out some way to get this bill to go through, it's interesting because they lost on the Commerce Clause, didn't they? They lost pretty dramatically. But anyway, nonetheless, so it took us a few months in the beginning of last year to kind of figure out how could we, what else can we do at the state level? And this is a bill that it got to committee, filed late and got to committee and got heard, never got voted out of committee. Now, you can imagine, the way I think of it is that there was a time when Obamacare was being negotiated, and at the table, and again, we've had culture-changing legislation has occurred numerous times. Certainly the introduction of the income tax, federal income tax, the New Deal, the LBJ, Great Society, and every single one of those instances, you had bipartisan votes. You had one party represented more than the other, but it was still bipartisan. So at the negotiation table, we weren't there, Republicans weren't there, conservatives definitely weren't there. But the insurance companies and the healthcare providers and the hospitals and drug companies, they're all there. They were at the negotiation table. They helped write the bill. They know what's in the bill. And so, so the challenge we have legislatively is that when we try to pass this through Missouri General Assembly, there'll be a lot of interested parties that don't, they like it the way it is. So that's going to be the political challenge. Well, great. Well, I appreciate your time and attention. I just wanted to also mention, I know if you had CommonCore discussion, you're going to hear.
We haven't yet.
Okay, and then I also pre-filed a bill to essentially get rid of CommonCore standards. There's a bill that I filed the same bill last year, and during the course of negotiation, and you need to know, and I actually have to run to another meeting, but and I know you've done a good job of understanding what this actually is. And now the task is really to explain to people that don't understand. And the momentum behind this idea is really starting to grow from interesting corners, I'll tell you. But no, last year we filed it to repeal it. And the compromise, again, there's a lot of resistance to reversing it. The compromise was simply to mandate that the Department of Education go to each congressional district and hold a very public hearing on it. And even that simple compromise was killed. That legislation was killed. So I would say that there's a certain group of thinkers that know that this isn't the right thing, and there's bipartisan opposition to what and you would think would be the right thing. So CommonCore has an institutional support. Yes, ma'am.
What is your bill? Is that still the same one?
No, I think it's 513 or 514. I pre-filed 3 of those, and that was one. Maybe it's 514. It's easy enough to find. It's on my Senate page. And again, what's happening is interesting is, I would say that the biggest pushback initially came from both people in education that really look at the standards and think the standards are very substandard. And I think the way that it's starting to evolve and understanding is that the standards they're very watered down, and they really are for really bright students, they're watered down a lot. And what we're finding out as time goes on is for students that are challenged, have learning differences, things like that, the standards are probably too difficult for them. We have a test market, really, the state of New York is the first, they're ahead of the country, really, and they went to get tested. So let me back to this. So those in education say the standards are substandard. Those that think things like this should be as close to the school board as possible, school board, county, state, clearly this is a federal push. I would suggest those that are anti-crony capitalism, which that's probably, if there's one thing, thank you. Which I can't stand. I think it has the greatest influence on us having positive outcomes. This is an extraordinary for-profit push. So, you know, we all have children we all as parents spend a certain amount of money to get our kids ready for the ACT or the SAT. There's an entire industry that's all set ready to go to sell you CommonCore Grade 2 study guides and things like that. So there's a lot of people that were really interested in having this come to be, and then the pushback came from people that said, no, this should be a local decision, not a federal decision. What's interesting, though, is we're starting to get some interesting allies, because on the other side of the spectrum, these tests that have first been enacted are producing just horribly low test scores. And I'm not paraphrasing, but Arnie Duncan, who's Department of Education, of course, they're not involved in CommonCore officially, right? So I think, and I might not get this entirely right, but about a month ago he said, well, you know, this is the anti-Common Core movement. It's a bunch of suburban moms that just realize that their kids are less than geniuses. Now, and which of course he tried to walk back. But anyway, what he was referring to is that the first round of testing, that taking this very different exam has produced dramatically lower test scores. And now as that has started to occur, though, those teachers and teachers unions, especially who a lot of their compensation is tied to test scores, and there's as much as you may think, testing is a good thing, and I think standards are very important, high standards are important, and testing is important, but as this last year has gone on, there's now people on the far left, really, who are saying, hold on a second, this Common Core thing. So I would tell you that when I filed this bill last January, I knew the odds were long, and I was right. We couldn't even get an informational bill passed. But this time around, I didn't file an informational bill. I filed, let's get rid of this thing. And I think that there are people that 9 times out of 10 don't agree with a conservative's point of view, but they're starting to understand that this Common Core is not what was propped up to be decided.
As a special education guide teacher, I'm concerned that Arnie Duncan was able to rewrite the law so that what used to be an IEP privacy protection was saving. No more. And how many of these special needs parents know that? Or if their child is being considered for evaluation, are they really going to want to get help if they find out that everything that they're telling about what the dirty stuff is going on in that family is going to be known to everybody?
Yeah, I think the students that are most at risk are those with learning differences, with IEPs, and really our smartest and brightest kids, the really high IQ kids. I think that this is kind of a watered down, for them it's a watered down set of standards, and for those that have learning challenges, I think it's...
no provisions made for how they take those tests.
No, that's right. And I mean, so it's not just one thing. It's funny because as we learn, every couple weeks you learn something more, and it's something more, and then you start to understand there's so many aspects of this that are just, so dishonest. I mean, the whole crony capitalism part of this is extraordinary. This is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity for lots of different companies. Not to mention the fact that in Missouri, I don't want to steal too much thunder, but Common Core requires an online examination, and a significant percentage of our schools don't even have internet access. So we think that the cost would be between $200 to $300 million just to take the test. Anyway, yes, ma'am.
I am very concerned that Common Core is an implementation of Agenda 21 by the UN, and it usurps our First Amendment rights. It's taking away the rights of parents. It's taking the rights and giving them to the UN, and we're losing the...
I don't know, I'm not here to say that is or isn't, but I think it's important to understand.
Read the bill.
Well, I know, and I've read it.
Read the bill.
I think what's interesting, though, is that at its inception, you had Governor Jeb Bush, who was a big proponent. Also, Governor Mike Huckabee was a big supporter.
He heard from me about his position on Common Core.
I think you're right, because about a month ago, he withdrew his support. So, Senator, and I think this is a very common theme with Common Core, is that the 45 states that adopted Common Core, they adopted Common Core it was part of the application process for Raise the Top Dollar. So they were coerced again by the federal government financially. But they adopted Common Core standards before they were even written. So they had no idea what they were. And then, but no, so Governor Huckabee, who I think I agree with him on a great number of things, he initially supported the bill. What he said was, look, what started out as a good, thoughtful idea, that maybe we should have higher standards that could pull up our performance on a global basis. That's not what Common Core is today. And so I couldn't agree with him. I've only come to know Common Core as it is today. So I'm comfortable to say I'm exactly where Governor Huckabee is, which is I clearly don't support it, and I hope the Missouri would withdraw from it.
It's another version of not reading the bills with Obamacare. And everybody watch out. The Pacific Treaty is coming next. They're shoving that through.
Yeah, but the thing that's interesting on this one, though, ma'am, is that no one ever voted for this. Okay? The governors adopted it before it was even written. Okay, so no General Assembly ever voted for it. We never voted for it. So that's why it was like very much below the radar for 2 or 3 years. And now that it's come out, we all see it, and And we
well, I hope everybody is calling DC about that treaty.
Well, call these guys because we got a chance to vote on it here in Missouri. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Excuse my boisterous.
No, I appreciate it.
I'm Italian.
Yes, ma'am. Right.
And I know what come down with Common Core and homeschooling. Has Carrie Messner read your bill?
Yes.
And what
Supports it.
he supports it?
Yeah, so Common Core standards will be, homeschoolers will have to comply with them. Private schools will have to comply with them. The Archdiocese in St. Louis has already begun the process of implementing them. So it's not just a public, this is every single child, K through 12.
I'm just curious what your peers saying then. What do they not understand?
It was interesting, when I filed the bill last January, the first thing I did before I filed it, I went around and I asked the members of my caucus what they thought of Common Core. Do you know how many of them knew what Common Core was? Two.
Wow. So do you think it's just a matter of education still? Or
Most definitely. Because again, there was never a moment where a law was voted on. There was never a bill drafted. It was a governor's association agreed to implement it before it was even drafted. And so when we tried, last year was the first time in the Missouri General Assembly that anybody even heard about it. Unfortunately, we only got about 45 minutes in a committee hearing, education committee hearing. The establishment is very much, they're for it. They're completely for it. I mean, in my mind, I think for them, it's just the next new thing. To the extent that
well, I think that's true.
Yeah, so to the extent that, we're dissatisfied with the outcome of public school education, it's the next thing. And they actually have spent considerable dollars without actually reporting them back to the budget makers here over the last 2 or 3 years. They've been doing a lot of education, what do they call it, employee education. They're spending millions of dollars getting their teachers ready to do Common Core, and yet the school boards hadn't voted for Common Core, General Assembly hadn't voted for Common Core, no one had voted for it. Yes, sir.
What about the idea of nullification?
Well, this is not a federal law even. Okay, this is our governor. He signed off on us adopting Common Core. And this is where it started in 2009, and then the implementation of it began shortly thereafter. Department of Education and most of our public school districts are in the process of getting ready. The first test, Common Core test, is school year 14-15. So this is the first budget period where we're going to have to come down and ask for more money for computers and broadband, all that kind of stuff. Yes, sir.
Somebody's going to stand up and put in black and white that executives are not lawmakers.
Well, it's in all of our constitutions.
So, push it. I mean, I don't understand where these executives are given any kind of latitude to make laws for us.
I'm totally with you. I totally agree. Yes,
You
ma'am.
know what, maybe I look at some of the bills that our legislators file, and instead of taking my taxpayer dollar to decide what bridge to be named after who. Right. And all the time being wasted. And I'm doing wasted on these little petty stuff that only makes them look good when they come home for the meeting.
If you don't mind, I'd like to respond to that a little bit. I've filed bills 2 years in a row to have session go from 18 weeks to 12 weeks.
Yes.
Now, those, one of them got a Florida date, but they both were, people legislative officials like being here, okay? But this idea of wasting time, don't get, that's a canard. It's not, look, we have so much time. My point is, we have so much time. So we can name 1,000 bridges and 5 exercises in a week and rechange the.
Taxpayer dollars pay for that secretary of
But you don't pay, but my point is, here's my point, is you pay a flat rate, okay? So you pay $35,000 for 5 months if we do one thing, or if we do 1,000 things, or do 10,000 things. But my point is if, and I've heard this a lot, oh, you waste, the left likes to, oh, you waste all this time on Agenda 21 or these other bills. Look, there's so much time down here to do so much more that it's impossible for us to waste time. I mean, there's so much time to waste because we do so very little. Okay?
Thank you for
But so my point is that we can do what we do, and we can do a whole lot more. But the idea that we shouldn't do something, we shouldn't name a bridge because we don't have enough time, that's false.
My point is, I would rather they would take some time to know. It's unbelievable.
I agree with you that I think we should do a lot more serious legislation down here and take on very specific policy issues. But in my opinion, the challenge with that is that the special interests, outside forces, are really who dictates what the agenda is, what bills are debated, how far they go, and that's I'm brand new to politics. So I was elected in 2010. It was the first time. I'm a father of 6 and very busy guy. and also I'm very proud of the fact I won a very, I'm one of 2 Republican elected officials, senators from the St. Louis area. So, but it's been one of the, there's a short list of things that are disappointing. What is probably the most disappointing to me is that our lack of willingness to take on serious policy issues whereby we ourselves, as elected officials, have an understanding of what it is we should accomplish with respect to policy. Too often, we just look over at this special interest and say, well, what would you like to have us consider this year? What would you like to have us consider this year? And we bring that issue into the building, and then that issue's opponents come onto the playing field, and that's why we spend all this time in gridlock and discussing, certain policies about things that somebody who picked myself up out of my family, out of my career. I didn't come down here to work on some special interest agenda items who will take 5 years to pass it or not to pass it. I think that there are serious issues facing the state, and there are obvious public policy fixes that we just don't. That's not how we work down here. We don't do those types of things often enough. Yes, sir.
So you're running. You ran.
Yes. This is my 4th year.
So you understand, we all in this room understand that perception is what dictates what is perception is what matters to the non-educated, non-politically educated,
Right.
not us. I think what she is saying and what we would all agree on is if you can take things, it's almost a principled statement. You take these things that really don't matter a lick to any of us because CommonCore matters to us.
Yeah.
Obamacare matters to us. The Harry S. Truman Bridge doesn't matter to us.
I understand.
Except that, and I'm not lecturing you to understand, except to say that it matters to us when our tax dollars are spent on signs for the Harry S. Truman Bridge. If you could put all that stuff on a consent agenda on the very last day of session, because and that way we know that you're not insensitive. You still did these things, but you also focused on everything else that matters.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are in agreement. And so again, I'm one of 24 Republican senators, and to the extent that I push these guys, last year, my first 2 years, we spent a lot of time away from the floor, which I didn't understand, and then our floor leader is Senator Ron Richards, and Ron, I prodded him, and others prodded him to work. And we actually spent more time on the floor last year than any other Senate since Republicans took control. But again, that's one half of the legislature. Yes, ma'am. I mean, before should I stop soon or?
Because I've been back here, and so people.
Yeah.
My turn.
Oh, I don't want to.
Thank you for your passion because I heard you in Chesterfield and on CommonCore. My passion is Obamacare, but what I noticed about you is that you're the person saying no to federal bills, saying no, that's your job to say no
Right.
and yes to our Constitution.
Right?
Okay, back to Obamacare, my personal passion. How can we help beyond explaining it and talking it up? You need money, what else do you need?
I'll tell you what, Missouri Torch is here today. They're live streaming this.
Yes.
And that's one of the very few channels that we have to get ideas and information out to Missourians. So if you're not already on Missouri Torch, get on Missouri Torch. If you're not supporting Missouri Torch, support Missouri Torch. You know, I try the best I can. Up until 5 years ago, I'm like, I followed federal laws. I mean, I knew what was going on in Missouri a little bit, but I followed what was going on in D.C. more. And then I tried to find out as much as I could, and it's so hard to find out any of what's going on down here, and to get an unbiased representation of what's going on down here. And it's really important that we have, well, first of all, you all need to be as good as you can be, as explain as many people as you possibly can. And we all know the tools, Facebook, things like that. But things like the Missouri Torch, those are the mechanisms by which we can push back. The other side is very well organized. You know, I mean,
I think they're right back there, actually.
yeah, well, there you go. They're very well organized, and so they understand exactly, and that's fine. I mean, that's what we need to do a better job of is go out and document as much as we can about what we're hearing from the other side. So anyway, so I appreciate your comments. It's very nice of you to say, and I think it's a matter of education, and it's a difficult challenge.
Do they know how to get in touch with Ray Lester of Missouri Torch?
Yeah, Google Missouri Torch, and you'll be right there. I'll take one more question, and I know somebody else has got to talk about it.
This isn't a question either, but I just want to commend you, because one of the things you said was, I didn't think it had a chance, but I did.
Right.
Nice.
Okay.